You waived any genetic challenge right here.
That clause was for emergencies.
This is an emergency. Both are legal parents.
The paper wasn't thick, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even new. It was a slightly wrinkled contract page pulled from a 3-inch binder, the kind lawyers carry so often the edges start to curl like tired leaves. But when the clerk placed it on the evidence camera, the entire courtroom leaned forward as if the page had gravity. Eleanor Mercer stood behind her attorney, with her arms wrapped around herself, nails digging lightly into her own sleeves. She could still smell the hospital on her skin. Sanitizer, warm plastic, the faint metallic bite of fear that follows you out of a neonatal unit and into a courthouse hallway. Across the aisle, Trent Mercer stared at the page without blinking, jaw clenched, one hand gripping the back of his chair like he needed something solid to keep from slipping. Neither of them looked like new parents. They looked like people who had been awake for too long, living on adrenaline and denial, trying to make sense of a baby who existed and a marriage that no longer did. Judge Lillian Reeve adjusted her glasses and looked down at the highlighted paragraph. Her voice stayed calm when she read, which made the words land harder. Section 17.9, she said, eyes moving line by line. Contingency, dissolution of intended parents' relationship. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. Trent's attorney, Bryce Halpern, shifted, already halfway standing. Judge Reeve lifted a hand without looking up. "Counsel," she said, "sit." The courtroom went still. Even the air felt quiet, as if it didn't want to interrupt. Judge Reeve read again, slower this time, the way judges read when they're about to change a life. In the event the intended parents separate, divorce, or otherwise terminate their relationship prior to the child's birth or prior to entry of a parentage order, both intended parents reaffirm and shall remain the intended legal parents. Neither shall take any action to disavow, disclaim, or undermine the other's parental status based on genetics, marital status, or timing. The intended father expressly waives any challenge to intended mother's parentage on genetic grounds. Trent's face drained of color. Eleanor's knees felt weak. Judge Reeve lifted her eyes from the page and looked directly at Trent. "Mr. Mercer," she said, voice now flat, "you filed an emergency petition yesterday asking this court to declare you the sole legal parent on the basis that Ms. Mercer is not genetically related to the child." Trent swallowed. "Your Honor," Judge Reeve didn't let him build momentum. "You signed this agreement," she said. "You initialed each page. You signed this clause." Bryce Halpern stood quickly. "Your Honor, this is a private contract. Custody is a matter of—" "Best interests," Judge Reeve finished, eyes hard. "Yes, and the best interests of a newborn include stability, lawful parentage, and adults who do not weaponize technicalities in the first 48 hours of life." The words hit the room like cold water. Eleanor's attorney, Marina Holt, stood calmly. "Your Honor," Marina said, "we are asking for immediate enforcement of the parentage intent and for temporary custody consistent with the agreement and the child's discharge plan." Judge Reeve nodded once, then looked down at another line, highlighted in yellow. "And this," she said, "subsection B, custody upon discharge." Eleanor's breath caught. Judge Reeve read the sentence everyone had somehow forgotten existed until it was too late to pretend it didn't. "Upon hospital discharge, the child shall be released to intended mother for primary care, with intended father to have parenting time as agreed by the parties, or as ordered by the court, considering the child's medical needs." Trent's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Judge Reeve set the binder down. The sound of it, paper and leather meeting wood, felt louder than the gavel. "Here is what this court is going to do," she said, voice steady. Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs. First, Judge Reeve continued, I am issuing an emergency temporary parentage order, recognizing both Eleanor Mercer and Trent Mercer as the child's legal parents, pending entry of a final parentage judgment. Trent's eyes flashed. Second, she said, I am granting temporary primary physical custody to Ms. Mercer based on the contractual contingency clause, the medical discharge plan, and the need for immediate stability. Mr. Mercer will have supervised parenting time for the next 14 days, given the volatility of the circumstances and his attempt to remove the child from the state yesterday. Trent's attorney objected. Judge Reeve didn't blink. Overruled, she said. Third, Judge Reeve added, voice sharpening, any attempt to interfere with the hospital discharge, contact the surrogate, or remove the child from the jurisdiction will be treated as contempt. Do you understand me, Mr. Mercer? Trent's voice came out thin. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Reeve struck the gavel once, final, instant, and in that moment, the baby's custody, her custody, his custody, their custody, was decided by a clause that should have been obvious, a clause that had been signed, initialed, notarized, a clause nobody remembered until the fight had already started, a forgotten sentence buried in legal language, waiting like a trap door. If you're wondering how it ever got to this, how a surrogacy agreement designed to create a family became the thing that tore one apart, how a contract clause became the difference between a mother going home with her baby or standing in a hospital hallway begging, you have to rewind, back before the NICU monitors, back before the courthouse lights, back to the beginning when the word surrogacy still sounded like hope. Eleanor and Trent Mercer were not impulsive people. They were planners. They met at a friend's housewarming party and spent the entire night talking in the kitchen, the kind of conversation that doesn't need flirting because it's already intimate. Trent worked in finance, structured, analytical, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Eleanor worked in marketing and communications, creative, strategic, the person who could tell you what a room would feel like before you stepped into it. They married 4 years later in a small ceremony in late September, when the air is crisp and the light is soft enough to make everything look romantic. Then they did what couples do when they want a family. They tried and tried and tried again. For months it was private disappointment, a negative test hidden in a bathroom trash bin, maybe next month, said with a smile that didn't reach Elena's eyes. Then it became appointments, lab work, ultrasounds, medical words that felt like cold tools. Then came the diagnosis that changed their path. Eleanor couldn't carry safely, not because she didn't want to, because her body had a scarred reality that didn't care about desire. The doctor was gentle when she said it, but gentle doesn't soften the impact. If you become pregnant, she explained, the risks are high. It's not impossible, but it's dangerous. Eleanor nodded like she was listening to a weather forecast. Inside, she felt something collapse. Trent held her hand in the parking lot afterward and said, "We'll figure it out." Eleanor tried to believe him. They explored adoption. They explored continuing treatments. They explored everything people explore when they want a child, and the world says, not that way. Eventually, they landed on surrogacy. Not as a trendy solution, as a last door that still looked open. They met with a fertility clinic. They met with an agency. They heard phrases like gestational carrier, escrow, pre-birth order, and intended parents. They signed a mountain of paperwork. They watched their dream become a file, but a file can still feel like a future. The agency, Bright Nest Surrogacy, assigned them a coordinator who spoke in warm confidence. "Most journeys are smooth," she said, "and we guide you through each step." Eleanor wanted to believe the word guide meant protection. It mostly meant process. The surrogate they matched with was named Hannah Ortiz. 34, 2 kids of her own, a pediatric nurse who understood medicine and boundaries. In the first video call, Hannah smiled and said, "I'm doing this because I had help when I needed it. Now I can help someone else." Eleanor cried quietly after the call ended. Trent hugged her and whispered, "This is it." They met Hannah in person at a cafe with tall windows and the smell of cinnamon in the air. Hannah was calm and direct. She asked questions that made Eleanor respect her instantly. "What are your expectations?" Hannah asked. "What are your boundaries?" she asked. "How do you handle stress?" she asked. Eleanor answered honestly. Trent answered confidently. Hannah nodded, thoughtful. "I'm not your employee," Hannah said gently. "I'm carrying a baby for you, but I'm still a person. I need respect." Eleanor nodded quickly. "Absolutely," she said. Trent said, "Of course." In that moment, they all meant it. In that moment, nobody imagined a courthouse. The legal contract took weeks. It was thick, detailed, written in the language of prevention. It covered everything people don't want to think about: medical decisions, expenses, bed rest, life insurance, emergencies, miscarriage, termination, confidentiality. It also covered the thing everyone assumes will never happen. What if the intended parents break up? The clause sat there, buried among other clauses, like a fire extinguisher you don't notice until smoke appears. Eleanor and Trent had separate attorneys review it, as required. Eleanor's attorney explained the clause in a calm voice. "It's standard," she said. "It protects the child from being left without clear legal parents if the relationship changes." Eleanor nodded, overwhelmed. Trent initialed every page, impatient. "Can we stop reading and start the journey?" He joked. Everyone laughed. The ink dried. The clause was filed away, forgotten, not because it wasn't important, because nobody wanted to imagine needing it. The embryo transfer worked the first time. That sentence alone felt miraculous. Hannah's first ultrasound showed a small flicker on the screen, a heartbeat. Eleanor squeezed Trent's hand so hard he winced. Hannah smiled through tears. "We did it," Eleanor whispered. Trent kissed her temple. For the first trimester, the journey felt like cautious joy. Hannah sent weekly updates, photos of the baby's size compared to fruit, messages about mild nausea, fatigue, cravings. Eleanor and Trent attended appointments when they could. They respected Hannah's boundaries. They didn't crowd her. They didn't demand constant access. For a while, it felt healthy. Then slowly, the stress returned. Not from Hannah, from Elena and Trent's marriage, because the pregnancy didn't fix what had been quietly building. It amplified it. Trent started traveling more. At first, it was normal: quarterly meetings, conferences. Then it became suspicious: last-minute flights, vague explanations, phone calls taken in the car. Eleanor tried to ignore the dread because she didn't want to contaminate the pregnancy with conflict. But one night at 1:17 a.m., she woke up and saw Trent's phone glowing on the nightstand. A text preview lit the screen. "Miss you. When can we talk?" Eleanor's stomach dropped. She didn't pick up the phone. She didn't search through it. She didn't want to become someone she didn't recognize. Instead, she waited until morning and asked a simple question. "Is there someone else?" she said. Trent stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "What?" he scoffed. Eleanor's voice was steady. "I saw the message." Trent laughed, dismissive. "It's a colleague. Don't start." "Don't start," Eleanor repeated quietly. Trent's eyes narrowed. "We have a baby coming. You're really going to do this now?" The way he said "baby" felt like a shield, like Elena had no right to ask questions because motherhood was already in motion. Elena's throat tightened. "I'm asking because I feel something," she said. "And I need honesty." Trent's smile was thin. "You need to relax," he said. "Stress isn't good for this process." This process, not their marriage, not their truth, the process. Eleanor didn't scream. She just felt the room get colder. Weeks passed. Elena tried to focus on Hannah's pregnancy and on preparing for the baby. She painted the nursery with a soft green color she found calming. She folded tiny onesies until her hands cramped. She read parenting books at midnight when sleep wouldn't come. She told herself she could hold two things at once, a fragile marriage and a fragile pregnancy. Then the second shoe dropped. Eleanor found a hotel receipt in Trent's jacket pocket. Not a work hotel, not a conference, a boutique hotel downtown. 2 nights, 1 room, 1 name on the reservation, Trent's. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, holding the receipt, staring at the numbers, listening to the refrigerator hum like nothing in the world had changed. When Trent came home, she set the receipt on the counter without a word. Trent's face tightened. For a second, he looked like a man caught. Then he recovered. "This is insane!" he snapped. "You're going through my pockets." Eleanor's voice was quiet. "Were you with someone else?" Trent's jaw clenched. He didn't deny. He didn't confess. He said the worst kind of sentence. The sentence that isn't truth, but isn't a lie either. "It's complicated," he said. Elena's throat tightened. "This is complicated," she echoed, "while Hannah is carrying our baby." Trent's eyes flashed. "Don't use the baby against me," he snapped. Eleanor felt something in her chest break. "I'm not using the baby," she whispered. "I'm trying to protect the baby from chaos." Trent scoffed. "You always think you're the only one who cares about outcomes." And in that sentence, Eleanor heard what she'd been avoiding. Trent cared about control. Eleanor cared about safety. Those are not the same. Eleanor asked for separation, not because she wanted to blow up their lives, because she couldn't breathe in a marriage where truth was treated like inconvenience. Trent agreed quickly, too quickly, as if he'd been ready. They moved into separate bedrooms, then separate apartments, and immediately, the surrogacy journey changed tone, because when intended parents separate during a surrogacy pregnancy, everyone becomes nervous. The agency becomes nervous, the clinic becomes nervous, the surrogate becomes nervous, because now there is a question no one wants to ask out loud. Who is the baby going home with? Eleanor assumed the answer was simple, both of them. They were both intended parents. They both signed, they both prepared, they both loved the baby. Trent assumed the answer was simple too, him, because he was the genetic parent, and Elena, because they had used a donor egg due to her medical issues, had no genetic tie. Eleanor knew that fact. She just didn't believe it could erase motherhood, until Trent started using it like a knife. The first time Trent hinted at it, it sounded like a joke. "You know," he said on a call with the agency coordinator, "legally this might be easier with me, since I'm the biological one." Eleanor's heart sank. She laughed awkwardly. "What are you talking about?" Trent smiled. "Just saying." The coordinator's face tightened. "This is why we have parentage attorneys," she said quickly. "We'll handle orders." Eleanor tried to let it go. Then Trent said it directly in a text. "I'm not sharing custody with you if you're not legally the mom." Eleanor stared at the message until her eyes burned. She called him immediately. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded. Trent's voice was calm, almost bored. "I'm being realistic," he said. "You want to leave me. Fine, but the baby is my blood." Eleanor's throat tightened. "The baby is our plan," she said. "Our intention." Trent laughed quietly. "Intention isn't DNA," he said. Eleanor's hands shook. "So you're going to take my child?" Trent's voice sharpened. "It's not your child if you're not the mother," he snapped. That sentence hit Eleanor like a slap, not because of biology, because of what it revealed. Trent wasn't grieving the marriage. He was negotiating assets, and he had decided the baby was one of them. Hannah Ortiz found out about the separation through the agency. She called Elena one evening, voice careful. "Are you okay?" Hannah asked. Elena swallowed. "I don't know," she admitted. "Trent is trying to cut me out." Hannah was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "I don't want to be in the middle, but I need clarity. I'm carrying this baby. I need to know the plan." Eleanor's chest tightened with shame. "I know," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Hannah's voice softened. "Listen," she said. "Whatever happens between you two, I want this baby safe. I want a smooth discharge. I want a legal plan. I have kids at home. I cannot have chaos at the hospital." Eleanor nodded, even though Hannah couldn't see it. "I'll get it handled," Eleanor said. But handled wasn't a phone call. It was a war. Trent refused to sign the pre-birth parentage petition. His attorney told the parentage lawyer, "We need to review." Review became delay. Delay became risk, because without a pre-birth order, the hospital would list Hannah as the legal mother by default, and any transfer of custody could become complicated. Eleanor's attorney, Marina Holt, pushed for an emergency parentage filing based on the contract. Trent's attorney argued Eleanor had no standing because she wasn't genetic. The agency tried to mediate. Hannah begged them to settle before delivery. Everyone was nervous, and because everyone was nervous, mistakes happened. One paperwork deadline slipped. One filing didn't get submitted in time. One hearing date wasn't secured. And the forgotten clause stayed buried in the agreement while adults argued around it. At 37 weeks, Hannah went into labor early, not dramatic, just real. Contractions, hospital, monitoring. Eleanor drove to the hospital with her heart pounding, hands sweating on the steering wheel. She arrived to find Trent already there, not in the waiting room, at the nurse's station, arguing about paperwork. Eleanor heard her name spoken by someone she didn't know. "Who's authorized?" a nurse asked. Trent's voice was confident. "I am," he said. "I'm the father. I'll sign." Eleanor stepped forward. "I'm the intended mother," she said, voice shaking. "I'm the parent, too." Trent turned toward her and smiled without warmth. "You're not on the birth certificate," he said quietly. Eleanor's stomach dropped. The parentage attorney wasn't there yet. The hospital social worker looked confused. Hannah was in a delivery room dealing with pain, and outside her door, adults were treating her pregnancy like a legal chessboard. Eleanor's phone buzzed. A text from Marina. "Headed to courthouse. Filing emergency. Do not sign anything." Eleanor's hands shook. Trent stepped closer, voice low. "Go home," he said. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Eleanor stared at him, breath shallow. "You're not taking my baby," she whispered. Trent's eyes hardened. "Watch me," he said. The baby was born at 2:46 a.m., a girl, small, loud, perfect. She went to the NICU briefly for observation, nothing catastrophic, just caution. But even caution feels like crisis when you're already falling apart. Hannah held the baby for a short moment, tears in her eyes, then the nurse took the baby away. Eleanor stood in the hallway crying silently because she wasn't allowed into the delivery room, the surrogate's choice, her right, and Eleni respected it. Trent hovered like a man waiting to claim property. At 5:12 a.m., Trent tried to file an emergency petition in another county, one where he thought the judge would move faster. At 6:30 a.m., Marina filed a competing emergency petition in the proper jurisdiction. At 9 a.m., the court scheduled the hearing. And by noon, Eleanor was standing in family court while her baby lay in a hospital crib under bright lights. That's how the cold open became real. That's how the custody of a newborn became a courtroom decision. and that's how a forgotten clause became the blade that cut through the chaos. After Judge Reeves' order, everything moved quickly. Hospital staff received the custody directive. Security was notified. The NICU social worker adjusted access lists. Trent was told he could see the baby only under supervision and within strict hours. Eleanor was given primary authorization for discharge planning. Hannah Ortiz was relieved. Finally, someone had built a legal wall around her body and her home. Because Hannah had never wanted to keep the baby. She had wanted to deliver, recover, return to her children, and not become trapped in someone else's divorce. The court order gave her that. It also gave Elena something else. Time. Time to breathe. Time to hold her baby without fearing a sudden removal. Time to become a mother in the only way mothers can become mothers, through presence. But the case wasn't over, because a temporary order is not an ending. It's a bridge, and bridges still require you to cross. 2 weeks later, the court reconvened to enter a final parentage judgment. Hannah appeared by video, exhausted but calm, a glass of water beside her, her own kids' voices faint in the background. Trent arrived with a different energy, less confident, more defensive. Eleanor arrived with the baby's discharge paperwork in her bag because she had been living in a reality Trent had tried to deny. Judge Reeve looked at both parties and spoke plainly. "This court does not punish people for separating," she said, "but this court will not allow a child to become leverage." She entered the final parentage judgment recognizing Elena and Trent as legal parents. She adopted the custody arrangement temporarily consistent with the clause, while ordering a full custody evaluation for the infant's best interests over time. She also issued a sharp warning to Trent. "Your attempt to forum shop and remove the child was reckless," she said. "Any future interference will result in sanctions." Trent's attorney tried to argue the clause shouldn't bind custody. Judge Reeve answered with the simplest truth in the room. "You signed an agreement," she said. "You cannot treat it as sacred when it benefits you and meaningless when it doesn't." Eleanor held her baby tighter as Judge Reeve spoke, the child's warm weight grounding her. Trent stared down at the table, jaw clenched. The clause had done its job. It had stopped the immediate harm. It had prevented a newborn from being ripped into an adult fight, and it had forced a man who thought genetics gave him monopoly to face what he'd agreed to when he thought love would last. Later, Eleanor would replay the moment she first saw that clause on the evidence camera. Not because she loved the courtroom drama, because she couldn't stop thinking about how close she came to losing her baby. Not because she wasn't a mother, but because paperwork had been delayed and adults had assumed intent didn't need protection. She met with Marina afterward and asked the question that kept her awake. "How did we forget?" Eleanor whispered. Marina didn't sugarcoat it. "Because you weren't expecting war," she said, "and because everyone reads contracts like they're just formalities, until they're not." Eleanor swallowed. "And Trent?" she asked. "Did he forget, or did he pretend?" Marina's eyes were tired. "Does it matter?" she asked gently. "The result is the same." Maybe it didn't, but Elena couldn't stop caring, because forgetting is human. Weaponizing forgetfulness is something else. Months passed. The custody evaluation happened. Therapists observed. Parenting coordinators documented. The court adjusted schedules as the baby grew, shifting from supervised visits to structured parenting time, insisting on stability. Trent became less aggressive when he realized the court would not tolerate games. He wasn't suddenly kind, he was contained, and containment is sometimes the first step toward peace when trust is gone. Eleanor learned motherhood the way she learned everything else in life, by doing, feeding at 2 a.m., learning the baby's cries, walking the floor in socks when the baby wouldn't sleep, Feeling joy hit her like sunlight in unexpected moments. She also carried grief, because surrogacy is complicated even when it goes right. And this had not gone right. She had a baby in her arms and a marriage in pieces. Some nights she stared at her daughter's face and wondered what stories she would have to tell someday. Not about Trent, about truth, about how love can crack and still leave something beautiful behind. One afternoon, a year later, Eleanor sat in a parenting class required by the court, an absurdity, considering she had been fighting for the right to parent at all. The instructor asked the group, "What do children need most?" People answered with the usual words. Love, security, consistency. Eleanor didn't speak right away. Then she raised her hand and said, "Adults who don't use them." The room went quiet because everyone understood what she meant. Trent sat across from her, eyes down. He didn't argue, he didn't apologize either, but he didn't argue, and in a case like this, silence can mean a lot of things. Sometimes it means guilt, sometimes it means growth, sometimes it means a person realizing the room no longer rewards their old tricks. Here's what most people don't understand about stories like this. The surrogacy agreement didn't implode because surrogacy is inherently wrong. It imploded because humans bring their mess into contracts and then act surprised when the contract becomes a mirror. A surrogate carried a baby responsibly. A clinic did its job medically. An agency followed process, mostly, but one missed filing, one delayed order, one relationship fracture, and suddenly the baby's life was floating in legal uncertainty. The forgotten clause didn't create the problem. It was built as a solution for the problem everyone hopes never happens. And it worked, barely. It worked because it existed, because it was signed, because it was clear, because a judge read it and chose stability over ego. So if you're listening and thinking, could that really happen? The deeper question is this: how many people sign agreements they don't read because they believe love will hold forever? And what happens when love doesn't? Eleanor learned the answer the hardest way possible, in family court, with her newborn in a hospital crib, waiting for a judge to read a sentence nobody remembered. In the end, the custody wasn't decided by shouting. It wasn't decided by who cried harder. It wasn't decided by who had the better story. It was decided by a clause, quiet, specific, written for the moment adults would fail. A clause that said, intention matters, that parenthood is not just blood, that you don't get to erase someone's motherhood because you're angry at them. And when Judge Reeves signed the order, she didn't just assign parenting time. She drew a line in permanent ink. A child is not a bargaining chip. A contract is not a costume. And a promise, especially a promise that creates a life, doesn't disappear just because the relationship that made it broke apart. Eleanor carried her daughter out of the hospital. 2 days later, the baby strapped into a car seat with a tiny hat on her head. The sun was bright. The parking lot smelled like exhaust and spring rain. Eleanor's hands shook as she checked the straps twice, then 3 times, because fear doesn't evaporate overnight. Trent stood a few feet away with a court-ordered supervisor nearby, watching. Not close enough to touch, not allowed to claim, just watching. Eleanor didn't look at him. She looked at her baby, and as she slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, she felt the weight of everything, loss, relief, anger, gratitude, settle into one steady truth. She was going home, not because a man allowed it, not because genetics granted it, because she had done what motherhood requires even before she held a child. She showed up, she fought, she stayed, and somewhere in a binder, on a page that once felt like background noise, a clause had remembered what the adults forgot. That intention is not a feeling, it's a commitment, and sometimes that commitment is the only thing standing between a newborn and chaos.